Tommy, here we are. You want to tell them what it took to get here? I mean, we're in a dirtbag hotel.
Yeah, we're wedged in a corner back here. I'll tell you.
We got asphalt being done behind us. We just had to start over. We had to turn the fan off. The guy at the counter is like, "No, you can't use our perfectly good conference room that nobody's at because nobody's here." But
yeah, we had to pry in them a little bit, get them to bend a little bit, let us in.
We were supposed to be on the water this morning.
Yes,
she's blowing 5 foot, footers. I mean, I'm very fortunate. You guys that don't know Tommy Harris, but he came down from Kenosha, not just to do the podcast, but to do some fishing with our buddy Chip Cartwright. And it's one of those deals where I've been doing this a little bit, maybe not as long as you. I got a lot of days.
You're there.
5 foot waves. I go, and you hear people like, I'm like, I've seen your 5 foot waves. They're 2 footers, right?
Yeah, we can go. We'll be all right. No,
they don't know what 5 footers. I always tell them they measure their unit with the same measuring stick. It starts at about 2 foot or something. But so putting a little context, here we are on the banks of the Huron River, and just craziness. Like a lot of stuff. A lot of fishing goes on here now. They got a huge ramp, but like when I was in high school, like we didn't have that big fancy ramp.
No.
Nobody came down here. And I thought when we snuck down here in trailer boats, when that people weren't really doing that much. And then all of a sudden it's like, we thought we knew something because it was kind of far from Toledo where I grew up, but kind of far. It's like middle point between Cleveland,
Sure.
People just didn't fish down here. And it's crazy to think, but for years, there was not many boats that fished in this edge of the Western and Central Basin.
Oh, it takes a couple people to search it out and put the word out. The word gets out. Then all of a sudden they come. They'll come from miles. And right now, this is the place to be, right down here in this Huron area. A lot of fish out front, staging, coming back from out east with that cold water. They're out front right out here. Like I said, this fall, this is one of the areas you want to fish. And it gets hit hard. It gets hammered hard with the fall brawl and everything else they have going on. That expanded things out here. That really put the word out.
Talking to one of my local buddies, and he said, what he misses about the fall. I'm like, okay, what's that? And I guess I never really thought about it like this. He said, do you remember everybody that hates each other in April and May out here and they yelling at each other and running over each other? In the fall, there was like this truce because there was only honestly like 20 some guys that still had trips. A lot of guys pull their boats or they're duck hunting or doing whatever. And there used to be just this camaraderie of like guys that hated each other the other 8-9 months a year. And because there just wasn't many guys, we didn't have the facilities to accept them like we do now.
Exactly.
And but now we've got the fall brawl, which is like a bittersweet thing because it's great for fishing and stuff, but you also have 12,000 people or whatever it is, trembling around there, and the sportsmanship is at times lacking.
Yes, it's good for the community. The hotels, the bars, the restaurants, stuff like that. And like I said, them boys look forward to, especially back Wisconsin, Minnesota boys, all over, look forward to coming out here this time of the year. It's hammer time.
Yeah,
it's hammer time.
Lake Erie, I guess, you've lived long enough, and I'm not quite old enough to really have fully experienced the first Lake Erie boom. Because, in the 80s there, when like guys would go out and fill garbage cans up with walleyes and just whacking and stacking, like I was too young, right? Now we've almost have that again, 100 million fish or whatever the number is or whatever. But the end result is just like, it's almost like crazy good fishing.
It is. I don't think you can go anywhere and catch the quality of fish and the numbers of fish you go through every day out here. No matter what method you use, no matter what time of the year it is. It's like just keep moving around. You find that pot of fish and you go nuts.
I mean, I've got buddies that literally they'd come here to not even fish, but to learn their electronics because they're like, at home we don't see enough to even learn. And I'm like, oh my God. And as I travel around with some of this business fishing stuff that I do and sponsor things, I totally I come home from one of those trips and be like, I missed you.
Oh yeah. There's anything that's even close to what's going on. Years ago, when I started coming out here, there wasn't much water clarity. It was mud, really a lot of mud. But back then, we could pick the rocks. When I mean the rocks, I'm talking the reefs. You make your slide. Everybody's throwing weighted spinners, different depths. Move up, slide the boat upwind, turn it off, and just slide down and cast and cast. And you couldn't blow them. The only thing that'd blow them fish off them reefs is the boats traveling right over the top. because a lot of them are used for shallow.
They still haven't figured that out.
No. You know, and then you make that big old slide down there picking all them fish. And if you had any common sense or respect for the next guy out there, you'd fire up your boat, but you'd go way around the pack and set
They
up.
still don't do that.
They don't do that.
It's you can definitely tell the old guard that gets that, but they ruin it for themselves too. But
you know, they might go halfway up and see a guy catch a fish, and they just slide right in the pack instead of, you know, being a little common sense, a little respect. Go to the top. You're gonna catch your fish. Those were the days. I'm an old guy. I like that rod in the hand. I love that. And, you know, the cast. 6 guys in the back of the boat. You know, we're talking about, you know, electronics and that. We didn't have much for electronics. Maybe a flasher, maybe a paper graph.
Your eyeballs.
Yeah, that's about it. And the guy catches a fish in the corner. What was the count? Well, was it a splash? You know, was it a 5, a 10, 20? What were we using? And what color were you using? And everything basically back then when Bill Parrish was making those Parrish peas and all that, 90% of his baits had a white body on it. He started out with a white, and then he would put maybe a chartreuse head, a red head, a black head on it. He kind of tricked them out a little bit. And then they got into some of the gold stuff, the silver stuff. It took a while. But when I'd bring my boys from Wisconsin, 6 of us would go in little florals down in the little old garage, walleye capital of the world with Toussaint River there. Go in there, each of us would buy the whole card, that color, whatever it was, would buy 6, take the whole card. We didn't care what it cost. Jump on that boat and hand them out. And then somebody's catching something on a certain color, just grab it. And a lot of times it's a psychological thing.
I think you're right. Because I know, like, again, I want to jump ahead of this, but I'll just say some of the old farts that we both know, they used to, on trips, they'd switch rods because somebody would be like, oh, I ain't catching them because I don't have this. And they'd hand them that, they'd take their rod and they'd catch one on the next cast, and that guy still wouldn't be catching them because there was just more to it, right?
Exactly. And sometimes just a change of color, a change of lure, you might get more involved in it, more involved and serious about the count, the presentation. There's more to it than just throwing it out.
Well, you said the word communication, and I think, like, us guys, like, we're often not known for good communication.
No,
right? but you're 100% right. And I know, at least I think I know. I'm going to throw this at you. So when I have people in my boat, often they're playing on their phone. You get guys like, oh, I don't know what a bite is. And again, we'll start trolling, right? And they're like dipsy divers or boards or whatever. I can't see the bites. Well, like, yeah, dude, Bob, you're playing on your phone,
right?
Or you're over here, you know. When you're doing that casting thing, and it's no different with anything, you got to be engaged and pay attention because, you know, knowing where that bite occurs on the swing, or where you said like the count, because when I fished in some of those casting teams many moons ago, that was a long time ago even for me. And, you know, you had to know, like, immediately those guys would be like, he wouldn't set the hook and he'd tell everybody, hey, 7 count. And their 7 count was your 7 count.
Yes.
And not 12 or, you know what I mean? And those guys, and they paid attention every single cast. And I think a lot of those guys that are good at that type of fishing would be good at other types of fishing.
Exactly.
Because they're detailed.
Exactly. They're opening up to it. You know, they're listening to what somebody's telling them, not like they know everything. That's the biggest thing too, guys. They come around in certain areas. They know it all. Well, it's a different world out here. It's a different world in Mille Lacs or Minnesota or North Dakota. It's all different presentations. And you're fishing with guys with experience. Listen to these guys. They're just not blowing smoke up your rear. And a lot of people don't, because first thing they'll say, well, we don't fish that way back home. Well, you knucklehead, you ain't back home. You're out here in Ohio. Listen to these guys. They're telling you something. But a lot of people just, they just won't be open-minded about it. They're stubborn.
Really? Fishermen stubborn? I try not to be, but we all are to a point, right?
Yeah. And, you know, it's out here, it's a different world. Like I said, back then when I started coming out in the late 80s there, down at Florals, it's nothing fancy. Just forward-weighted spinners. That old Florals Marina just is like a house, you know, and the Toussaint, you know, that wasn't the best traveling down there. And it's shallow. You had to go out in front and take a sharp right with the boat on plane. Otherwise, you're going over that sandbar out front.
Yeah, and you know, the shame is even before you get to that, nowadays, like, that marina is basically no more.
Yes.
Because the Army Corps engineers wouldn't let them dredge. And
yes.
It got to the point you could quite literally walk across it. Not shallow.
Yes.
Walk across it. And, you know, that was a hub. And I think about that as a guy who grew up in Toledo, that's much closer.
Mm-hmm.
And now it seems like more and more of the fishery is focused on east and guys following the movements.
Yes.
Because, that whole 90-10 for guys listening to this that don't know, and on Lake Erie, 90% of the fish are not in the Western Basin after the springtime.
Correct.
Yet 90% of the fishermen are.
Yes.
And that west end, and that's, again, we'll get into it in a bit. I don't want to jump ahead, but, some of the best captains back in that day that I can remember had multiple slips. And I was just like, oh my. Now I put my boat on a trailer and I go 5 spots in 5 days.
And see, they were ahead of the program, way ahead. And they were smart. And these guys that run the services, if they just lock into one area, stay down to the west, they're missing the big game. They're missing it. You got to travel. Like I said, this time of the year, when them fish bust a move to go further east in that deeper water, and then it gets to a certain point, they'll start coming back this way. Like now, they're staging out there, but the water is still pretty warm out there. It'll change, but the fish are stacked. But you move with the fish.
Yeah, it's like one big conveyor belt.
Right? Yes,
chasing the food and the ladies, Tommy. It ain't much different than in this hotel room. Well, I mean, not this hotel room, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, it's a great place to come out. Like I said, somebody always says, "What kind of fish you catch out there in Lake Erie?" I said, "Anything that's got a face on it, you're going to catch it." And that's part of it too. Whether it be a sheephead, a catfish, you're here to catch fish. Sure, your number one target's a walleye, but you're there to catch fish and then have fun. That's the bottom line.
So let's back up a little bit for the guys that have been living under a rock and don't know who you are and what you did. You, like, even before, like, you were a custom painter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like custom painter before everybody was doing their garage and everything like that. But even before that, I think of, like, talking with you through the years. And again, as long as I've known you, sometimes you don't sit down and have these conversations and, you
right,
eating dinner with you, and then we go, well, I didn't know that. Right
now you tell me.
Yeah. But you were into, like, you call them rat rods and custom painting. So give me a little bit of that when your youth on how we even got to.
Well, that all started when right down the road from my grade school there was a hot rod shop, and they were cutting channel hot rods, sectioning them, lowering them, but they're always their best thing they did was their custom painting. And they were shooting a house of color lacquers back there, the candy colors, not the old pegs, candy colors. And I'd come down from school and I'd just stand in that doorway and I made sure I didn't get in their way because they'd put that right foot of theirs right up, what. They didn't care what you were back. You were a kid. Get out of the way, kid. But they accepted me down there. And after a point, they let me in there. And then I tell you, it wasn't much. I was shooting my bicycle. I was painting anything just to get the experience. And then I started getting into painting model cars. Back then, your local hobby shops would have, custom car contests, yada, yada. Man, I'd clean house because I'm in there shooting candy apple colors, metallics, metal flake colors. The rest of Joe Blow, he's taking shit from a rattle can. It's night and day. So I'd go into these shows and I'd always win best award for paint. And then I had a buddy of mine, he had a 32 Ford. He traveled the hot rod circuit around the country. And he was nice enough to take my model car with me all the time and then enter it. And I'd end up winning these big meets at these national car shows. And I run the local, the regionals, and then ended up winning the big one out in Los Angeles. I was like 12 years old. I'm shooting candy colored stuff.
So you think you've been more creative or more just into, like, the art end of it when you're?
I like to be known as being creative, to take something and tweak it and take it to the next level that nobody's tapped into that world yet. I've always been able to figure things out. If I didn't have something, say financially or whatever, you'd find an alternative. That it's always out there. Search it. A good thing. I mentioned when I started, I didn't have an air compressor. I had one down at the body shop down there, but I didn't have a little airbrush. And believe it or not, Toledo, Ohio had the old Netcraft company.
Yeah, I worked there as a kid.
And they had that little 25-cent catalog with that guy sitting there in the rocking chair, smoking his wacky tobacco and rocking.
Herb.
Yeah.
Herb Ludgate.
But they had an airbrush in there. And the source of air was actually a hose that come off the airbrush, and you'd screw it on the stem of a tire. That's 30 pounds PSI right there. So all my pressure was coming off a car tire. I didn't have the money for an air compressor, and I didn't know anything about air compressors back then. But why in the world would I have a fishing catalog and find something to create, products with? Here it is. Simple hose that goes to a car tire. I did that for a few years, and I finally had enough money to, buy a small air compressor. And then I kept updating and updating from them through the years. Simple thing as that. And it
Yeah, that's
worked.
crazy. Yeah, I missed that. That was a real old school tackle shop.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was there a couple times through the years before they moved. And they had just about anything and everything. It was a neat place.
Yeah, it would be the original owner's grandkids, I guess.
Wow.
One of them passed, and then they sold it to and joined up, and so different deal.
They remind me of there was the boys in Milwaukee on Greenfield Avenue, the Ranke brothers. They had the same thing, was a house. And I'm telling you, I don't care. Anybody that walked through that front door did not walk out without buying something. They had fly tying materials, lead head molds, you name it, they had it. And 2 years ago, I think they finally went out of business. I hate to see them boys go too, but they're around probably 40, 50 years. And their dad did that prior to them getting into it.
Yeah, I work with Fish USA, which is kind of like one of those in betweens. I mean, they're huge, but I like to think that they avoid what some of the other box store mistakes have been. They got a lot of people working on it. They're real good fishermen, really good people. And I was just looking literally a couple nights ago on their new products on their website, and because I was looking for some plastics and some other things, but nevertheless, they got all these do it molds. They literally just in the last couple days pots and stuff, and I'm like, dude, that's old school. And I'm glad to see that, because a lot of those places that used to do that, like you just said, aren't selling that anymore.
Yes.
And so to get a hold of these things that, somebody like them that's not really a mom and pop place, but yet are bringing back some of those mom and pop traits.
And that Do It they were on a roll for a lot of years. And then they started selling the molds where you could send them out and have a machine, a guy with a CNC machine, your own styles. In fact, through the years, I had a guy. He was up. I don't know how I ever found him. I think it might have been in that Fishing Tackle Trade News catalog. There was a guy in Idaho that was a tool and die maker, and he actually made me a couple forward-weighted spinner molds that I designed. Of all places, Idaho. But yeah, just stumbling through that Fishing Tackle Trade News. All that stuff was there. It's not like today where you got the website and you Google stuff, yada yada. You would have to stumble into it. And somebody had to really trust you for to tell them wherever they got their resources, wherever they got their products from. A good example, like I mentioned Jack Crawford and the man Fishing Facts, all them tied lead heads on the back of that magazine were all his. That guy was way ahead of his time. His paint, for an example, at one time he had a jar of paint coming from, I think it was Oregon. And it didn't come UPS or FedEx because they didn't have it back then. It come by Greyhound bus. I remember him going, he said, I got to go to the bus terminal and pick up that paint. So how could they ship it that far, especially in the winter without freezing or whatever? But that's what Crawford used to do. He would go to that next level like that. Now you want something, sit on your butt and push a few buttons and it's on your doorstep.
And I think about when you were a kid, 12 years old, no offense, that was a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
And you're using your dad's, car tires to power your
airbrush. Oh, you get mad. Oh, you get hot.
I can see that. But, you just think like that ingenuity or fire or whatever you want to call that drive. Like, nowadays, I think that, some of that is lacking, forget fishing just in general.
Exactly.
And like you said, 3 or 4 times you've already basically you find a way. That was the gist of it.
That's the bottom line. You had to find a way, and if you had people that really trusted you, and you had to have people in that industry that trusted you, they wouldn't give you the time of day. And Crawford was the one that really took me under his wing. It's the first time I knocked on his door. I was actually making floating jigs at the time down the basement with a Coleman stove and do it molds. Put a clamp on it and little polystyrene beads in it and expand them. And I remember I knocked on his door. He looked at me, he goes, what the hell you want? Grumpy old man. I says, can I show you something? What do you got, kid? And I showed him. He goes, come on in. He never let me down his basement, but sit at the kitchen table. That's another old timer thing. And finally I ended up down the basement down there. He had a pile of jig molds. See, he used to be a tool and die maker. So he was machining all that stuff when CNC was just coming into the market years ago on a milling machine. So he could make his own molds. He had piles of them. And Jack poured all the lead heads. They were sent to Pennsylvania. And I think he told me there were 60 women that were tying for Fishing Facts magazine full-time at the time. And here's this old man that had a full-time job. He's down the basement pouring lead, and he's one of these old school guys. A lot of guys died from them fumes from that lead. He had no ventilation down there at all, none. But they'd come back, he'd pour them, he would tie the two-tone heads. Another thing about his stuff that set him apart, he wouldn't tie just a black thread. He had to have fluorescent thread. He was into colors and the details. And then his heads were always two-toned. He'd start out with a mother of pearl, and then he would take it and dip it halfway, maybe with a chartreuse or a green, a black, a blue, a red. And then he'd put triple eyes on them, dot them triple eyes by hand. He started all that stuff, creativity, and that detail was his biggest thing, and his stuff really stood out. But like I said, to get to that point, that busy, pouring down your basement, keep them women busy tying all them years.
Which kind of leads me to think Scott Stecker, who started Reef Runner way back in the day there, he used to always tell me, he said, Ross, you got to sell 2 people. And he said, you got to do it in a particular order. And I said, what's that? And he said, fish and people. And I go, not in that order. And he said, bingo. And I wonder, that stuff like that, is that just catchy to the eye or give confidence?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or does it matter?
Yeah. And, as for lures, and you get into these custom painters and that, there's an old saying, even a blind squirrel finds a hickory nut, And there's days, I don't care what you use, it'll work. But other days, you got to finesse it. You got to figure out a program, and it's just not going to work. And like I said, I give credit to the guys painting nowadays, but it's a lot easier because you can sit on your butt and Google something, and they'll tell you exactly how to airbrush a pattern. And you can go to Hobby Lobby. And the biggest influence in the painting business, this big surge on these custom painters never would have happened. It wouldn't have been for water-based paints, because they could not afford $160 quart of paint.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff now, I mean, I imagine you cringe because it's just everybody in their garage is painting and got a web page, or not even a web page, they just got a Facebook page.
They're just painting the paint. They don't look at the finished product, the reason behind that color pattern. They're just painting the paint, And to me, I don't care if the Maharaja painted it with gold flake and diamonds and everything else. But you take that custom painted stuff and you put it down in that dirty no clarity in that water, it's black. There is no color to it. And sure, the biggest thing, you catch the fisherman, sure. But I always wanted to manufacture or build something that caught fish, not just look good, That was my main
novel
thing.
Concept, right?
Yeah.
But not often followed.
And if I put all my products in a store, I want to see them turn it. I just don't want to see it sitting on a wall, because it's not doing me any good for reorders, and it's not doing any good for them because they have a big investment in it and nothing's moving. It takes somebody to get out in the lake, send people in the store like the old days at Florals. Before you come in there, we'd ask them, what colors are you catching on? Well, they go, yeah. Man, they're gone. You buy them. But you got to have that little horsepower behind you. So you just got to keep that wheel rolling, man.
Well, and so nowadays there's again, some of our mutual friends are just I know they're like these guys that aren't paying excise tax. They're not doing this. They're not doing, because everybody's painting in their garage and they got a Facebook page or whatever. And no disrespect to that, but then they start copying the patterns. Again, I don't have any skin in the game with that, but I could appreciate if in my world somebody was doing the same thing or whatever. Yeah. You're like, come on, man, don't be a shitbag where everybody's painting the same thing. But that's why I've never asked you this, but I'm curious. Did you know that you were branding yourself before that was a thing? Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
I mean, so you guys listen to this that don't know, now you all can go Google this, because he was doing this before there was a Google. But there's you've got a spider print, basically.
Right.
on your blade. So like if you've got, I don't know, silver and blue, and somebody copies it, or Wonder Bread or something, we got Tommy Wonder Bread, if you want to call it that, right? That it's got that spider on there. So you can
Right.
go through and somebody sees a picture of that, somebody sees it in a tackle shop, you can't copy that, or nobody did anyhow.
Right. I even went to the point, I went and talked to an attorney, and with the spider, I was always worried about, there's a company that made the spider wire, the fishing line,
Oh yeah.
you know,
And they got a little bit of money too.
yeah. And so I went and talked to an attorney, and he happened to be the attorney for Johnson's Wax. And he fished too. So I'll never forget this. I didn't know him from the man in the moon. So I called him up on the phone, or talked to the secretary there. And I told her what I wanted to do. Maybe put a trademark on it, or a copyright, or something, some a little protection. Because I was afraid they would come after me to fight, the spider wire. So she says, "Can you be here in 20 minutes?" And I lived down in Kenosha, and they were almost all the way to South Milwaukee. So I went like a big dog down there. I'll never forget her. I opened that door, and she goes, "You're here?" I says, "Yeah." I says, "I'm serious." So I went and met with the attorney, and I showed him what I had, and I started asking questions, and he wouldn't even listen. He was listening, but he'd just shake his head. He wouldn't say anything. And the paralegal's writing all this stuff down. So I said, first of all, I says, "I'm not Trump. I'm not Howard Hughes. I'm not a billionaire. I'm just a little guy." I says, what are we talking about for the billing on this, to process it?" He goes, we ain't gonna worry about it. I go, "A lawyer telling me that?" I go, "I'm worried about it."
No doubt.
But he really worked with me. But he said, "I'm gonna tell you right now, we'll file it, but they're gonna reject it. That's just the way the government works. They want more detail into it." And so we filed it. I think it cost me like $3,000, and they shot it down because I didn't hear from them for like 7, 8 months. And
Oh yeah, sure. The wheels of justice turn slow.
yeah. So, anyways, I was getting worried. Then out of the wild blue, I get this thing where they actually okayed it, the name, the artwork, everything.
Oh really?
They trademarked it. So I felt much better about that. And the only thing, then I got in trouble. Not in trouble. It was a compliment, because Walmart started coming after me a little bit.
Walmart?
Yeah. I'd say some stuff that looked pretty close to mine in a store. And it wasn't on a spider. It was the artwork. I used to have the old Tommy Harris custom painted blades. It was a guy, and it was almost a takeoff from what Lindy had with the fish over the shoulder, whatever. I changed it all up. Well, Walmart duplicated it. They duplicated it to a T. So in the industry, we had a blue collar attorney in Minneapolis. And I called him, and I told him, first thing he goes, "Well, who'd you piss off now?" That's what he said. He said, "I know it's somebody big." And I said, "Yeah, Walmart." He goes, "Oh, shit. Really?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he says, "Look, call them up. Be nice, be respectful, and tell them that you saw products with your company name, your artwork on it." And I called down to Arkansas, and I talked to the attorney, and she says, "I can't answer anything. It has to be in writing." And I said, "All I'm looking for is maybe someday my products be in your store without a conflict of interest." And, I said, I got a lot invested. And back then we had blister packaging, we had letterhead, we had envelopes, we had, what else? You name it, just thousands and thousands of pieces. And she says, "We'll look into it." Because the attorney told me, he said, they'll do a couple things. Either one, they'll take you to court and keep canceling it, and you'll be broke. Two, they'll offer you some money to buy it. Or three, they'll forget about it. One of them three things are going to happen. And sure enough, they sent me a registered letter and pretty much said, "Nice talking to you. Nice doing business with you. You go your way, we'll go our way." And like I said, I had to throw away all my artwork, everything I had, right in the garbage can, playing with Walmart. But it was good. At least they knew I was on the right track. And then I did change my artwork with Tommy Harris, custom painted blades and whatever else. So it
It would
was
have been a blessing in disguise, to be honest.
exactly, it was time to update. So I got the recognition I wanted. You know, they knew I was out there. And I thought maybe someday my stuff might be in your store.
So was there significance to the spider, or did it just kind of look cool?
It's all back to when motorcycles were taking charge. They were in full swing. You know, it was the Orange County boys, the Tuttle boys out there on TV. They built a motorcycle in the fenders in that were a spider web. It was bent round stock, and they had a chrome plated. There's a web on the fenders, the front and the back, and I think over the tank they had a spider web. So I'm thinking, well, we got to change that little scale finish because everything you see on a fishing lure has scales and a black dot. Okay, boring. That sucks. So what I did, let's change the scale and make it a web. Okay, trick it out a little bit instead of just going this way. Let's go the other way. Make a web instead of that boring old black eyeball. Let's trick it out with a spider. Take the eyeball body more or less and put the legs on it. Because when it spins, it all looks pretty much the same anyways. But it's something that it would catch your eye. And the thing is with they were printed over at WTP over in Coloma, Michigan. And Ronnie really helped me out. He ran the show. And then what we did through the years is instead of a black web, we had a black, we had a red, antifreeze. I think we did a blue one. So the webs are all different colors. And then what I used to do is take either a sterling silver blade for a base or a gold blade, a 24 karat, good stuff. And that was my base. And then I'd put the candy colors over.
Got to have a good foundation.
Exactly. You got to look like a big shooter out there. So yeah, the base, everything was quality parts and everything. But the base of it with the candy colors, I always wanted stuff with transparency in it. I just cringe when I see opaque colors, solid colors. There's nothing wrong with them, but I took that to the next level with the transparency, the flash, the bling. It got to be like the jewelry business with them blades. You put them any kind of light at all, them things would spark.
Bling bling.
That's right, just like the jewelry business. And like I said, when I finally shut the business down a few years ago, I didn't have any help. I was a one-man band. And I was busting out 150,000 blades a year.
Oh, man.
24/7. What'd I do?
Paint.
I used to tell people, if you die, tough, because I ain't going to your funeral. I got shit to do.
Well, and that's what people don't understand about some of this fishing stuff is it's definitely a passion project.
It's all in. You got to be all in.
Balance what?
Yeah. And, you know, it's no knock against the new generation or the old generation. If they get in this business, they're only good for about 2 years and they disappear. You got to get in, and it's always been in my blood. It goes back to them boys. If them boys wouldn't have been painting them cars with these candy colors and that, you know, I never would have got involved in it. That day they opened that door and I seen that mother of pearl on that old 49 Merc with the French Cadillac taillight. Swing, man, I was ready to go.
So I remember you talking, you know, like the car stuff early on as a kid, which is understandable, you know, and you know, hand painting, making the lines and doing all that stuff. How did you transition then to the fishing thing? Did somebody, you know, because again, was it dad or something? Or
I think it was, to me, I look back on it, it was time for a change, because a good example was when any muskie fisherman back then, everything was caught on a black bucktail. Why? Because that was the only thing that was out there. And the same thing, I look at spinner blades. There was nothing, no spark, nothing. It was in an infant stage.
I mean, were you one of the first guys to put the prism tape on like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it was between me and John Peterson from Northland.
The old bait fish.
That bait fish one. And I had that pattern before he did. Because when I was working with Ron back then it was called Witchcraft, and they ended up changing the name over there. It's crazy because some people thought that building had to do with voodoo and witchcraft. They were picketing over there.
Really?
Honestly, God.
Is that why you changed the name?
Yeah, they took that witch off the broom. They were
You
picketing.
know, I have some from like literally from high school, maybe early college, that it still has that logo.
Yeah. And then they went to WTP. That's the reason why they did that. Ain't
No,
that nuts?
that there's enough crazy shit going on in the world, but that just
That's back then.
oh my god.
But
So you had that pattern when because you were working closely with him.
yes, we took that silver foil. We did what we call a reverse image pattern. It's like an old, for people that remember old cameras where you had to film and you look at it, it was like a negative, and is in the reverse. So instead of a image printed on there, that it was clear. It'd go right through the tape, and then you'd put it on the blade, and then that color would come through, and you'd see that image on it. It was reverse image. That was really a popular blade. And Ron kept telling me, he goes, Tommy, I can only hold these guys off for so long. And what he was talking about was Peterson at Northland. They were great people over there, heavy hitters in that industry back then. They were the main players.
So are you telling me that because I think almost all of your blades had the spider logo, on it,
Yeah.
right? Like every one of them.
Except that bait one. That bait one.
And did you put all those on by hand?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I could do almost 500 an hour.
Oh my god. Like I don't think people, like, if you listen to this, like, because I doctor stuff up all the time with different tape. You know, I work with Chip at Silver Streak, as you know, and most people probably listening to this. And so we help develop some of these things, and we're, hey, let's do this and that, and then we ultimately have a nice finished looking better, but trying to get colors and things together. Putting prism tape on a blade and making it look good or not have the ridges and then the water get under so it gets milky is not like, there's got to be a trick to that.
Yes. In the summer, it wasn't bad because the vinyl, you could work with it. It was a little flexible. It was warm. Okay. And then the blades weren't cold, and you got to get them to not a certain temperature, but they got to be compatible. Okay. We're good adhesion, yada, yada. But when you get weather, say like this now, where it's changing, where it gets cold in the mornings and this and that, I used to have heating pads, and I'd put all the blades on a heating pad to warm them. And then the holograms, they come on a roll. It'd be 5,000 on a roll. But that's how I used to buy them at a time. And then you'd cut so many up, put them on that heating pad, and put the cover on. Let them warm up. Don't get hot. That's why they're flexible and they're pliable. And when you put them holograms on, if they're not right, you get a wrinkle in them. They're garbage. It's a one shot.
You would fire me in 10 seconds.
I fired a lot of people.
That's why you did 150,000 yourself.
But the trick was you'd pick them up with a razor knife, set it on there. But when you'd start in the middle with your thumbs and then push to the outside, this way, that way, and they're done. But you had to have them warmed up. When it really got cold, you had to keep everything warm, because in the winter, when it really got cold, if they weren't flexible, they'd wrinkle on you.
Kenosha cold is different than Ohio cold, but I guess that's like trying to put a bumper sticker on a car when it's 10 below.
Exactly. That was the biggest trick to it. And there's, people would try it, but you'd have to experience, it's repetitious work. The more you did, you would pick it up. But at that time, I couldn't afford it because they were trash. You couldn't pull them off. You could pull them off, but I don't know. Then you're double handling stuff. You're not making any money that way. It's a one-shot deal. Get them going, brother.
Better you than me. There's certain things I'm good at. Some I just know to stay away from. But yeah, you'd fired me a long time ago.
And that's what separated me from all these guys. It was called JOB, work. You know what I mean? Even if they really didn't send a lot of stuff overseas back then, look at it now. I've got a friend, in fact, he's out here in Ohio. He's got one of them computers. He can take a blank crankbait. He can print it, all the colors. He's got access to 30,000 different color combinations on that machine. He can do 500 on a sheet at a time.
Yeah, but I think that, like, numbers that keep Tommy Harris or like Chip Carter. I was just talking to Chip the other day driving down here when he said you were going to come down. Numbers that keep Silver Streak and Tommy Harris happy. Rapple would be like, right? I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. But that also allowed you to have that, right? So you were doing those things that, let's say you sold 5,000 of something, like, hey, that's a good situation or whatever, where Rapala would be like that. We're upside down.
That's small potatoes.
But then that kept those people from being able to get into that niche deal because maybe that pattern only works on Green Bay real good, or it only works on Eastern Lake Erie.
You hit it right on the head. Exactly. You had to work on something that was pretty much universal, a basic color. The biggest one I talk about basic colors, like a sterling silver blade with a silver web, black spider, and little candy blue stripe on the top. That bad boy, you can go anywhere in the world and catch fish on that. And that you work off of that, the Wonder Bread patterns. To this day, I still put them Wonder Bread patterns right up on top. Out here, everybody's, I don't know, I shouldn't say they're brainwashed, but it's got to be a gold number 4 cup blade. That's all it's going to catch fish. Bullshit. I fish tournaments. I throw some of the craziest stuff out there, catch fish on them.
Well, you had told me a while back, and I got it wrong. You're like, hey, what do you think Gary Roach's favorite spinning color when you saw him at a show or something? And I said hammered gold because I fished with Roach enough to know he was a simple dude.
Yeah.
And then I was wrong, and you told me it was.
Yeah, it was a show in Minnesota. I had a whole display. In fact, it was ice fishing show up at St. Paul. In my second year it was there down the basement. Now it's like 3 floors of stuff, which is great. But for some reason, I had a lure called an agitator, and the same thing was. I made them in 3 different sizes with a wraparound holograph body on it, 3-dimensional eye. I could not sell them damn things. I couldn't sell them. So to that situation, before I get into that, I had boxes of spinner blades. I just thought I'd take them there. And Gary come up to me and he's looking, and I said, which one is the best out of everything I have? And he snatched up that old Wonder Bread. He said, this one, I can go anywhere and catch fish on that. That crazy? But
that surprised me, man.
Yeah. It did. And back to that agitator, that was one that actually was designed, Gary Snyder from Jigawhopper over there. I went right now, I'm back working, doing some PR for Gary over there in Minnesota. And, but Gary, like I said, he was a heavy hitter. That Jigawhopper, man, they sold that stuff everywhere. But back to the agitator, he helped me design it. We made it. I thought Devil's Lake out there would buy them. They little bit. Other Wisconsin wouldn't dabble with it. Illinois, Minnesota. So there was a place up in Baudette called Tom's Tackle. At the time, they were wagon jobbers.
Like stop sign and.
Yeah. They used to load up that old truck and head down that Missouri River just for years. So one day I thought, I'll call them up. And I called them. And I talked to the old boy, and I talked to her too. The first thing I shouldn't say that to people. First thing I say is, well, you got any money? Don't blow smoke up my ass. I say, let's talk business. Let's get her done. And I told them what I wanted, and they bought it. They actually bought it. And they done very well with it up in Lake of the Woods. They call it a charmer. That's probably the #1 selling ice lure up in Lake of the Woods.
It's sometimes you just have to have the right people or the right fit, or maybe
yes,
because it's like, again, I worked with Reef Runner when I was a young guy, and obviously they've since sold and everything, but he sold the Slender Spoon.
Yes, I remember that.
That was just like he wasn't doing anything with it, and then all of a sudden, I think it was Custom Jigging Spoons.
Yes,
and they were just killing it with that.
They did. They lit them up with that damn thing. It's sometimes it's the right place with the right people. And sometimes it just clicks. And other times it doesn't click. Yeah, I tell these guys, you might have the best lure in the world. You might think it is, but Joe Blow, he might have no interest in it.
Well, I mean, there's been a lot like that. People don't realize things like the Flickerman or the Bandit. They sat in bargain bins and they just tweaked it, put a little marketing, and all of a sudden people used it. The lure didn't change, whether you like them or not. But obviously people have caught a lot more fish on round 2.
I tell people that. I remember seeing them in closeout bins.
$1.99.
That's right. Piles of them. Nobody wanted them.
And the guys, where guys started using those? You're a student in the game. Out in the Missouri River, because they were hanging 20, 30 in a tree a day. And so they just wanted the cheapest
Price
thing that had
right.
hooks that could actually maybe catch something.
And it's like in Green Bay, they kick ass with that crank up there. One, it's inexpensive. Two, it runs straight. And three, it catches fish. It's a producer. You know,
Yeah. I don't think that, like, I think there's two types of lure companies now, in my opinion. And I'd be interested how you've seen this kind of progress. I think you've got the people that are huge on marketing and they're like, we're going to put out 5 lures this year no matter what. And then I think you've got the guys that take the time. Like, I work with Rapala, and to see their process, dude, it's different level. I mean, you just know you're dealing with a different animal.
Yeah.
And but even then, like, where they used to go through and do tooling and all these changes, they were, when we came out with the gold miner 30 there, I was the only guy with that in my hands literally for almost a year, and we went through a ton of tweaking
I
with
bet.
that.
Yeah.
And they would 3D print one, and they would freaking, not overnight, but whatever it is, couple of days, they'd airmail that over here, and I'd have another working model. And it wasn't perfect, but it was like, okay. And we would make, I'd give them some feedback and tell them, and we changed the rattle and all this stuff. But we could do that so much faster and less expensive
Exactly.
than doing a tooling and then going, where in the past, an average company would be like, well, we spent X number of dollars on the tooling. It is what it is. Make it work.
Exactly. Or put it out there.
You think about it, like, Rapala don't miss very often.
No. And the biggest problem a lot of these guys have, they make something without testing it and tweaking it. That, it's even like injection molding. It takes thousands of pieces to get that thing trued up to exactly where you want it. It changes with the heat, and repetition, yada yada yada. There's so much to that. It's not just make one. Let's make 100,000 of them and throw them out there and think they're going to run straight, or people are going to buy them, or especially, are they going to be productive, or is Joe Blow interested in it? You got to have some horsepower behind you.
The marketing, yeah, you got to have a little bit. You got to have some cheerleaders.
Yeah,
some cheerleaders.
Little traction.
So in your time, because again, I've been doing this a long time, but you make me look like I'm just getting started. Right? You've seen a few more circles of the sun or something. But so, what are some of the biggest, like, lure things that you've seen? Like, I remember us talking about the quick change clevis. Like, I think a lot of people, and I'm not even talking young or old, just in general, don't appreciate or understand, like, the process of some of these things. Like,
Yes.
Like the quick change clevis. People are like, that's a little piece of. Yeah, but before somebody was smart enough to come up with that, for a long, many years, people cut their stuff or got lazy, didn't change sizes, colors,
Exactly.
or types. And so I know people all the time used to be like, oh, I can't believe you're going to lose a blade, that throws it. I'm like, yeah, but I changed 10 blades to figure out what the deal was.
Yeah, exactly. Greg Polly's a real good friend of mine. And like I said, that design it's been tweaked. I'd say probably maybe about 5 times through the years. Because the first one, the stirrup, was just a stirrup. There's no little clip on there, that little nub on there.
You probably love that it's selling blades.
You're right. I used to tell people that. I love it. Keep selling it because everybody was buying them. I loved it. It didn't come off or whatever, but he would change. You'd get the feedback. He'd change the molds. But again, they change the mold. It takes time. And then he made different sizes, not just the one size. Made them colored too, just to catch the person's eye or whatever. But it just made things simpler. He even had them on bottom bouncers where you could snap a bottom bouncer off of there. And then
like the pencil style.
Yeah, and then he had the sinkers. He made the walking sinkers. It's crazy because them Lindy sinkers. Jack Crawford, being a tool and die maker, he made his. His were like a banana shape. They were bent more, and they were more rounded, not that kind of flat on the top, kind of so on the sides. But yeah, he had his own walking sinker like that. I'm talking years ago. But Greg had all that, and people started jumping on the bandwagon with the quick change. And then you always, well, especially nowadays, you get some jackwagon sitting behind the desk pushing buttons. He's gonna stir the pot. Well, I lose 90% of my blades on them clevises. Just talking shit's all he's doing, stirring the pot. But like I said, the concept, the idea behind it, it was an excellent idea, especially that time of the year. Not time of the year, but that time when fishing there wasn't a lot of spark in it.
Was that 80s or when was that?
I'd say the 80s, early 80s. Oh yeah, mid 80s, something like that. But like I said, it was sometimes if it's too simple or you sell something too cheap, people won't buy it or use it.
I don't think it's good enough.
That's right.
Walleye fishermen are cheap asses. I'll tell you. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's brutal. As many companies as I work with and different things that are like, man, what's with these walleye guys? They want everything, but they don't want to pay for it.
Got their hand out all the time.
Oh, crazy.
I had so many people tell me, I can get you in this store. I do this, I do that. They don't do a goddamn thing. Blow smoke up your ass. That's all they do.
Pro staff handshake.
I was thinking this morning about the old sports shows. They went from 9 days down to 3 days, 4 days. Pretty much charge the same price that we used to pay for like a 10 by 10 booth. But those 9 days we used to do at a show, we had 2 weekends to sell your product, not one. That was a big thing back then. Monday through Thursday sucked that you had to be there. Nobody there at the show, but you had 2 weekends. You had them big Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, not just one.
So thinking about this, for, again, the young bucks listen to this maybe, or just even somebody like me that's, rehashing things and thinking, okay, wait a minute, no internet, guy like you out of the gates, not buying an ad in Fisherman, that's crazy money.
Couldn't afford it.
Yeah. I mean, Scott Stecker, he literally, for reefer, that's how he started. He saved every nickel he had for one ad, quit his job off that one ad. But again, you don't know that, and that's a huge gamble. But doing those sports shows, I can remember like in Chicago, so I'm sure you were
Rosemont, there. Yeah.
Like guys made their year because of the sales. Not only they would get there, but the afterwards, like the after sales. Or
exactly.
Call that.
Exactly, and that's the only promotion we had back then, other than print. And I was lucky to get quite a few. I got a lot of ink in the Fisherman magazine, and because I had some of the guys, not a lot of guys on that circuit, PWT, MWC, FLW, they were running my stuff. And you know how they do the nice interviews. They could win a tournament, but
I know where this is going.
They really wouldn't get the good, the good PR, because I understand I'm not paying for them big ads in your magazine. It's business. I get it. But what was really neat about it is, they have their walleye, new products in their walleye guide or whatever. Well, I'll tell you, brother, my stuff was always in there because it was new, it was creative, and guys were catching fish on it. You know what it cost me? What it cost me to have that in there? Nada, nothing. So it actually paid for itself without taking. Like I said, I didn't have the money for them big major ads. You're talking some big chinging to get in there. But back then, that was the Bible. That had in Fisherman magazine, and the guide to tournament fishermen, they were out selling product because they were talking about how they caught their fish. They might be getting up on the stage lying about what they're doing, but that was just part of the game.
Yeah, I think that, like you say in Fisherman, like stuff like that opened up so many fisheries that people like. I can remember back in the day when I was a young buck and Erie was the deal. It was still easier and weights were bigger at one point. And like Sakakawea, as a kid in his teens, no, I didn't even know where Sakakawea was. And I would say most walleye fishermen didn't either. There's
right.
nothing. Still to this day, there ain't much there.
You're right.
Military.
You're right.
And Devil's Lake, what that happened when that started filling up, there was like a town almost underwater that just kept swallowing things up. And that fishery, I mean, Al Linder or the Fisherman or whatever, and tournaments and things, that made that a go.
That's how they put them on the map. And like I said, when I lived out there in the early 80s, mid 80s, I had a good buddy of mine, Craig Thornby. He had a guide service called Devil in Ice. Well, you probably can't use that name today, but even their high school, they were known as the Satans.
No way.
Yeah, all them years.
And witchcraft ain't going. That ain't going.
Yeah, right? Yeah, they put the mojo on them. They took that away. Yeah, the Satans. You go in the store, you had shirts with devil heads on them. That was right up my alley. I love that stuff. But but it put them on the map. And when I was out there, they hated me out there because I was promoting that lake. I remember one time we caught a bunch of them big old 15-inch, I'd say probably 12, 13-inch, nice fish, perch. We put them on ice. We didn't clean them. And I went to the Milwaukee Sports Show and I had them in a cooler. People are going nuts. I never seen fish that big. Well, I told you, I should have been getting paid for promoting eggs, because I'm telling you, I know they sold a lot of eggs in them grocery stores, because man, they would bombard my truck, them locals. They would pepper it. Glad they didn't stab my tires or anything.
Oh.
I'm telling you, I mean, you can't get them eggs off in that frozen weather out there when it's 30 below.
Ouch.
It's stuck. And they'd say, why are you telling them people about this? Like, it's our lake. And I said, no, it's not. I said, they buy a fishing license. It's called revenue for the hotels for your city. And I remember that before the PWT, I used to sit in on the chamber meetings out there. I did a little work for KZZY radio over there. So I was lucky enough to sit in the meetings. And there was a couple of things there. One, they were talking about the PWT coming out there. They were like totally against it. One guy stood up and says, what do we want them people out here for? We can't afford them big ass boats and them new trucks. And I says, you moron, look at the money it brings in the community.
They bring them in so you can.
Wow. And then Kyle Blanchfield, his mother was there. She's the owner of Woodland Resort.
That's a big fancy place now.
Well, I remember she had the insight, and she mentioned this was back in the 80s, because the first place was going underwater down on the bottom of 6 Mile, or Creel Bay, down at Creel Bay. And then that one, they had to move it to the next location up the hill because the water was coming up. And then finally down the line, Woodland is what the end of the example or the end of product ended being. But she stood up and told them, I want to build a big resort. And they were laughing. They were snickering and this and that. I got up and I said, well, why don't you do it? Instead of throwing her under the bus, I said, she's got the go-dads to do it. Why don't you do it? And she ended up doing it. I'm telling you, bro, that's a beautiful resort. It's highly productive. People come from all over the place, whether it be ice fishing or duck hunting, goose hunting. And Kyle Blanchfield, class act. He runs it. Now he's got his sons underneath him. And they're good people. They got it going on.
Yeah. I mean, when you were out there in the Dakotas, is that where, because I remember in some of me and you talk a bunch, when we're driving sometimes, I get a little dose of history from my buddy Tommy, like the bottom bouncers. Like, again, guys on Lake Erie use bottom bouncers, right? I don't think most guys probably have. But again, that didn't start here, I can tell you that.
No, it actually started down on Missouri River down there. There's a company, I do believe they're still around. It's called Meter Tackle Company. They made bottom bouncers. And then that's when I was coming out here in the early 80s, I brought some of them. And I know the other person that had them too was Gary. Gary Roach put these guys on the bottom bouncers. But it was a simple way of fishing. And today, it's still a simple way. Bob Props Jr., I think he's got a pontoon boat. And all they do over the side of the boat, a bottom bouncer, leader, a hook, either a leech or a minnow. Just simple.
KISS method.
Yeah. And and then finally through the years, they started making them even out here. I think he got them even as big as 6 ounces now, 5-6 ounces.
Yeah, at least.
But years ago, an ounce and a half, that was the heaviest you could ever find. When I was making them, I ran a stainless wire, because stainless has a lot of spring to it. And because they were using just an old, I don't know, some wire you could bend. I don't know where they got it, from a scrap yard or whatever, but it worked. And then to trick mine out on the bottom of the bottom bouncer, I would make an R bend and put a swivel and a big number 8 blade on it. And a lot of times I wouldn't run them on the bottom. I'd run them suspended. And then if I did run them on the bottom, I'd make sure I'm in mud, and that would just stir everything up down there.
Which is ironic, because if you talk to somebody that is like a Bob Props senior or something,
right,
who is still around, you're not supposed to have a bottom bouncer on the bottom. You're supposed to occasionally tick. Is that the worst named lure presentation?
In 90% of the time, if these guys aren't onto it, adjusting it, especially if you got contour, they're laying flat. You're defeating the whole purpose. You got to set them right. You got to keep working them. And then, but like I said, even out here on the windy days on the downside, man, I just love putting them things out with that big old blade on there. Big old copper or gold or painted blade. Big number 8 Colorado. Something different. Just tweak it out a little bit.
So what are some other things, whether you kind of saw at infancy or just, some of the, I'm fascinated by how things actually have happened, So as an example, like guys around here, like nobody has any, history, right? Like they can't see, they think grandma didn't wear bell bottoms. And like, the lure Jensen dipsy diver, salmon deal, you know, jet divers, lure jet or bottom, all that stuff is just like, it wasn't walleye stuff. It kind of got brought over.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom bouncers may be an exception, but so some of those early years, seeing some of those things, like
Well,
what are some of those other?
back like I'll give you a good example. Like on Devils in the infant years when it just started going, the big thing out there was cast. Everybody casted. Nobody motor trolled. Nobody. That was unheard of. And back then, we were everything was shad wraps. The smallest shad
Remember, you
fives.
used to rent them when they first came out.
Yeah,
You couldn't buy them; you had to rent
you had to
them
rent
from
them.
shops.
No, you're right. And that's all they basically fished out there was they're all casters, and they fished the windswept shorelines. If you could take that little number 5 or number 7, just about put it on the shore and crank it, and the faster you cranked, the better it was. And then as the water started coming up, then they started getting into slip bobbers. They had no clue what a slip bobber was, trust me. And guys like Samson and them boys come, the PWT boys come out there. I think they had the biggest influence on changing techniques on that lake. In fact, I know they did.
Oh, 100%.
And they were going into areas people didn't even know that you could go back there. I had a buddy of mine fish the amateur side with a big shooter on the boat. He told him, he says, hang on. He went right over a wire fence, full blast. And my buddy, all his shit went bouncing on the back of the boat. He lost his rods. But they learned that you could go back and fish them backwaters. In every year it would flood. It just meant more land that's never been touched, farmland, whatever, marsh, anything like that.
I mean, there was literally churches and there was things
Oh
underwater
yeah,
there.
I've got a picture back home. I'm on the roof of a barn casting. One of the off old 281 over there. And then, like I said, now that road is gone. And the road that used to go from Minnewaca to Graham's Island, shit, I used to drive out there and I'd have a can of beer and my ham sandwich, take a break, on the way, on the side. That's like 30 some foot underwater. It's gone. But see, them local guys like Garski and Thornby, they were raised there. So they knew what everything looked like before the water come up. And another good example was when these guys, they got into slip bobbers, and then when that water got deeper, then they started trolling. For many years, they didn't even know what trolling boards were. I never saw one back in the 80s.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know that they were around. I mean, at least not what we know today.
The only company I think that originated the boards was them Yellowbirds.
Yeah, the original, the styrofoam with the big
the wire or whatever coming around there.
And then, again, salmon fishing.
Yeah.
Rover boards was another one.
And then, like I said, the PWT boys, they come in with all them, the slip bobbers, the boards. And then I got a real good buddy out there, Rick Darling, and him and Trana, they used to win everything out there. Locals, good guys. And they're one of the few to start messing around with lead core out there, believe it or not. With that small, little tiny Rapala, look like a little trout over the buckbrush.
It works out here too.
Yeah. But over that sunken buckbrush down on 6 Mile down there. But the problem is if you got tangled up in there, you weren't coming out.
I mean, do you think that, like, when I think of you, you kind of had your finger on the pulse back then with everything? Because I can even remember, I'm going to say not that long ago, it was over 10 years ago, but you got a hold of me because there were certain people trying to take credit for pulling spinner baits on lead core.
Yeah.
And you got me in touch with the people that actually were doing it.
Yes.
And I wrote an article for Walleye Magazine because there was some people misrepresenting the situation.
Yes.
Which
yes.
Those certain people had done that a lot through the years. But like, how did you have your finger on the pulse with that guy? Because that was actually in Nebraska with those couple guys that had been fishing spinner baits on lead core through the trees. And the reason they were doing that is that they could get them through where you couldn't get a crankbait through. Yeah. And they look like them bait fish and everything, right? And but again, the point of that is, like, how did you have your finger on that pulse with those guys?
I did a show. Where was I? It was Minnesota. No, it was at Fargo at that Farmer's Dome or whatever it is out there. Anyways, I went to Fargo because a lot of people used to come down from Winnipeg. I mean, the big boys on there. And they got the money. And they knew I was coming to that show, so they were all coming down there. And there was a guy in the backside of me, and they owned a shop down there in Lake McConaughey down there. And his father was the one that made the original spinner baits, the 1.5 ounce, 1 3/4. He's the one that really started all that. And there was he was superintendent of schools, and he had a friend. He was a physician down there. I can't remember his name. He fished tournaments big time. And that's how I got in. And I started researching McConaughey about these white spinner baits. In fact, a lot of my stuff ended up in that. So I sold a lot of spinner blades down there with them guys. But it just right place at the right time. And I did.
There's a knack for that. Being in the right place at the right time, just like fishing. You guys are, oh, he's lucky. Well, the guy that's always in the right place at the right time, time after time, that's more than luck.
And who would think a white spinnerbait? The white was a dominant color, bait fish color down there. And to this day, they're still down there casting them or whatever. I find it interesting because when I think it was a PWT or one of the circuits went out there, and them boys didn't know shit from apple butter about pulling them things, but they hired some of the locals in advance, and they showed them how to really run them with the lead core. Highly productive. And I kept saying, why wouldn't it work out here? Well, because nobody does it. No reason to.
It doesn't work because they didn't do it. Yeah. Well, and there's that, right? I mean, there are things that are just when the bite's good, or if you don't have the structure. A lot of that was to do with not hanging $8 crankbaits in the tree.
Yeah, but it just right place at the right time and meeting the right people. And then I was intrigued by them damn spinner baits. Spinner baits, walleye fishing, that's unheard of. That's their niche down there in Lake McConaughey. That's another. They got some big fish in that lake.
They do.
Big fish.
Yes, they do.
I know.
Their record's bigger than ours on the Great Lakes, just so you know, guys. I mean,
just like Wyoming. I had a guy call me from Wyoming one time. He wanted to buy a whole bunch of blades from me, and I go, "What the hell you got out in Wyoming besides nothing? Buffalo." He goes, "I'm gonna tell you something. Our state record's bigger than what you got in Wisconsin." He's right. He is right because of them reservoirs. And then I had a pretty good thing going out west. You just ask questions. If they want to tell you, they'll tell you. But that's how you learn from these guys. And back then, guys, they would open up to you. They were a big influence, and at the right place at the right time. And just listen. If you just listen to somebody, it might be bullshit, but it might be the fact too.
One of my buddies calls me the facilitator because I seem to be like the Kevin Bacon of knowing a lot of different people and putting this person together. I think of you as the original facilitator because, I mean, all of these different things, and even like how we got to know each other, right? Like, I mean, we live a long way away, and yet struck up a friendship. And then you look at guys like going back that we really haven't talked about yet that I definitely want to talk about is like Jim Foffridge.
Yeah.
A guy that was a super mentor to me. And I think a lot of people nowadays, and where if you're a young guy, or even if you're 40 something and you're trying to get into this, I think the thing is, with those guys, I learned a lot by just shutting my mouth, being a helper and observing. Like that's Gary Roach, when I was in my teens fishing with Gary Roach, right? And, there's a whole story to that, and we've talked about it, and this is your day, not that. But if you just like observe from guys that are good at what they do, you're going to learn a lot more than expecting them to tell you everything.
Exactly. And these are guys, I had people that go way back, the PWT or whatever. They didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of financial backing. They were diehards. They'd fish out here, and then they'd go back and fish Minnesota or go fish the Dakotas. Those guys I call them grinders. They were grinders, but they were good listeners too. And if somebody won a tournament, they would keep records. how he caught it, where he caught it, weather conditions, pre-fishing. They had all that information.
They were like a human spreadsheet.
Yeah, but they didn't act like they knew it all. They were so far involved in it. Any little suggestion, it was positive for them. They could work on something like that. And there was a lot of good people back then because you didn't have big sponsorships. They might have got a boat or some rods and reels. I mean, no big money. And I think most of them pretty much fished not to make a living. They tried making a living, but they enjoyed what they were doing. And the more they did it, the better they got at it.
I think that's true of anything. I mean, if you just like it and you hang around and you're good enough to keep doing it, you're gonna end up being successful. I certainly never got into fishing for notoriety or money.
Wow. I remember years ago, the first time, I won't mention any names. I call them the big
It'd be fun if
shooters.
you did.
The big shooters from Wisconsin.
I bet you I know you are.
They went right down the Missouri River down there. Thought they knew everything. They got their heads handed on a platter. They took an ass whoop. They didn't know
Wait,
shit.
I'm gonna guess. Is he the same guys that went and sucked on the Bob props?
Yeah. But but they kept going back. Then they'd weasel some information and kept records, and then they start putting programs together. And some of them are still around. I find it real interesting. They're so-called professional fishermen. You know, they can't go, hire somebody or whatever, get the best information, the latest information. But prior to them, say, taking that ride to North Dakota, I know the guy they call. I know to this day, they still call him out there. They make them 60, 70-mile runs. I thought they were professional. Figure it out. It don't work that way. You look for the easy way out.
There's a little bit of that. So when you came to Erie, again, people may or may not know this, but in the 60s and 70s, they were dumping waste in all these factories along the Great Lakes, specifically in Erie. And I mean, it was a dumpster fire. Then all of a sudden, the EPA came around and said, hey, you can't dump stuff. And surprisingly, when you quit putting that in, lake turned around, got nice.
Flushed itself out.
The walleyes it just blew up, let's say the 80s. When did you come this way, and who'd you go with? Like, give me a little lowdown on how that all transpired.
Well, it was right in the infant years, like you mentioned. And the way I ended up out here, a good friend of mine, Danny Searle, he lived in Racine at the time.
In Fish.
Yes, he lived in Racine at the time, and then he came out here with the Linders out here, and they fished with Jimmy. And they fished with Tommy Roginski, Countdown Tom. So on the way back, I talked to Danny, and he goes, Tommy, you got to go to Ohio, Lake Erie. I said, I ain't wasting my time going out there. He says, I'm telling you. He says, we're going back out in a couple of weeks. We'll pick you up. And it was me and him, Bobby Kaskowski, who ended up being director of the MWC. They call him the Hoobler, super guy. Another guy was Jimmy Whirlstad, and he used to write for Fishing Facts magazine. They called him Red Eye. He's always drinking a can of beer all the time. And I'll never forget it. We're coming out here, and Kaz was a cop in Franklin. And here's old Red Eye in the back. Be popping one in the back seat. Kaz, I'm going to tell you something. I get pulled over, I'm going to shoot you before that cop even comes to the car. But anyways, we come out here, and we fished with Tom Roginski. And I think Tommy lived he worked at Libby, the glass company there. And then he lived in Toledo. And he was on the Lindy Pro staff, like all the guys, because of Frofrich, introducing him to him. And I've been coming back ever since. I think the next year I brought a group of 6 out here. And we just kept cranking fish and kept coming back. Still coming back all these years.
So I'm going to back you up a little bit even then. Again, when you're like where you grew up in Wisconsin or Minnesota, like that's fishing country. That's resorts. Yeah. And out here, it wasn't like that. And Jim Fofrich, one of my mentors, he was really a pioneer in helping to get people coming here fishing, obviously with him, but everybody else. Like Jim understood if we promote fishing and if we promote the deal, like that's good for everybody.
Yes.
And so tell them a little bit about, like, again, the Lindy team, because it's Lindy, the company, but it was bigger than that because of what they did is set the groundwork for what we call pro staffs or pro teams.
Oh, yeah. And I think a lot of it, especially out here, it all started down at Florals down there because of Jim Profridge. I always called him the messenger, because every area needs a person like that that understands what goes on around here. But Jim had the vision. He could see they needed the advertising, the marketing, and he took it upon himself to bring the lenders out here, have articles in the Fisherman magazine. Then after that, he had Babe Winkleman out here, and most of that was on his own dime, his own time and his own dime. But he could see the big picture. I still say if it wasn't for him, a lot of this would never would have happened out here. He opened everybody's eyes, whether it be with him, with doing filming with the Fisherman. They wrote books about Lake Erie with the Fisherman magazine. That was a big piece of the puzzle. And being the messenger, he did a great job at it, whether on the water or doing sports shows. He did a lot of sports shows back my way in Chicago, Milwaukee area. But every place needs it. He had the vision, he had the knowledge, he had the know-how, and I don't think he got all the respect he really deserved.
He did a lot. I mean, and we had it was, I think, Dave Sanda on the podcast a while back, in Fish Guy, and he tells kind of the story of, or rehashed because what I had heard, because he was there, right? I wasn't. About Jim. Basically, they took a planer board, but Jimmy didn't even know what it was, a planer board. He just but he knew, hey, this is something that I don't have, and I feel like we could catch. Well, the story goes that they, Al and Sanda and a few of the guys had been up with a guy who road trolling, because in Wisconsin you couldn't troll for muskies. So this guy was road trolling, and came up with this, what we now call like an inline board or variation of the yellowbird, in order to, get around the oars and get away, and so that these muskies would bite. And anyway, he pulled that on Erie. So as far as anybody knows, Jimmy Foffridge was the first guy to pull a board, certainly an inline board, on Lake Erie. And,
wow.
But again, so many innovative things. The casting harness modification, he called it the walleye wiggler, I think was the name. And all these things. But even and that's why I asked you about, did you know you were branding when you did the spider blade? Is because Foffridge had a red van, and he painted that thing with a giant walleye. I can remember people just laughing. He had the first truck wrap.
Here he comes.
This is 30 some years ago, 40 years. I mean, and again, did you really understand the significance of even doing the trademarking and the spider on your blade? I know Jimmy, I don't think he understood. I think he just knew he was going to do things different.
I think when I got to the point with that, with the attorney and the trademark and this, I was getting serious. I was covering my ass is what I was doing, because you know how it is in this industry. If you have something, they're going to jump on it and manufacture it or tweak it out a little bit, jump on the bandwagon. But I didn't have a lot of horsepower behind me to do the marketing. You know what I mean? If I had the marketing, it would have been a different ballgame. My goal, when I got to that certain point where I was making good money at it, being successful, I wanted somebody to buy it. That's the only way you make money in this business, is make big fishing tackle, get it going, and sell it and go do something else. And that's the way I look at it. One time I flew all the way down to Sherman, Texas. There was a company down there. It was called Whopper Stopper.
Oh, yeah.
Remember those guys?
Was that the pre-rig worm?
Yeah, that's my boys down there. And when I flew down there, I was looking at, he had a way of doing injection molding with a pressure cooker. Of all things, a pressure cooker.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah, right up my alley. Blow everything up. But I went all the way down there that time. And he says, you come on down. He says, I'll make it worth your while. And at the time, it was like a sculpin. It was a plastic lure. He made plastic worms and all that. That was his main thing. But it was like not a sculpin, but a squid. And it had these tentacles with flat flippers on it. And I took that. I put a tube through it with a polystyrene head. We used to catch lake trout on it, put a mother of pearl head and drag it on wire. And he had the mold for that, and he wanted to sell it. So I went all the way down there, and it didn't work out. But he had something else that was neat. It was a lipless crankbait, almost like something like Strike King makes, just a lipless. But he had where you can insert tape in there, change colors on it. I've never seen that. Never. He gave me all kinds of them. And I go, why aren't you marketing this? He couldn't keep the two sides from collapsing to keep that nice tight inside diameter with the die cut tape. But man, again, that guy he was going into a different world. Nobody was into that. But that's what it actually made the trip worthwhile, even though I didn't buy that product from him. I was always stumbling into something like that.
That's what I said. Like, you keep just stumbling into the good things because that's not lucky when you keep doing it. but you also have to have that mindset to do it, right?
You got to have the initiative, right? It's got to be in your blood. If it's not, and I always tell people, you don't run it as a hobby. You run it as a business. If you're going to run something as a hobby, don't waste your time. You're not going to be involved in it. Maybe a couple of years, you're going to get tired of it. You got to go 100% at it and just pound it, grind it. You got to be a grinder, be successful. And if you're not a grinder, you're a wannabe.
I love it.
And you mentioned too about federal excise tax. I had all that paid. Pay the auditor, not auditors, but tax people every quarter. Pay your federal excise tax. And the thing is, I've had this discussion with other people. I really don't think the feds would go after these guys without federal excise taxes because they're not heavy hitters. They don't have any money. Think about it.
You ain't got nothing to take.
They don't have they're not a major player. And yeah, they're not going to waste the time to send an agent in to go through stuff and for some guy painting out in his garage or down the basement. They want the boys that got the money. One time I thought they were coming after me. I had a big old dog back then. He wouldn't bite nobody. And it was raining out that day. And this lady was knocking on my front door. Man, she's all dressed up in these fancy clothes and jewelry. And I thought she was selling jewelry or something, And I opened the door and she goes, "You Tommy Harris?" And I always say no. I'm terrible. They should be nice to people. So all of a sudden I said, "Who the hell are you?" She goes like this. And it was the tax people from Chicago, IRS. And she says, "Oh, yeah." She just questioned me about a 637 form. It is an exempt form, a tax form. But I pay my federal tax, my excise. And she says, and I had so much, I probably had $30,000, $40,000 worth of stuff down the basement, ready to go. And she goes, "Oh, do you mind if I come in?" I go, "Oh, no. It's my dog. He'll bite you." And I said, "I can't put him outside because it's raining out." But that was IRS. So she said, "Well, we'll send you a letter." We had our conversation. That's the only time. But she wanted to come in and snoop around. Yeah, they would have busted me on all that.
Somebody probably,
dropped a dime on me.
Helped you out on that.
But yeah, that's crazy.
So, any other really things that you look back on as far as developments or bites or things that broke open that you kind of were around?
Well, some of the development stuff, not personally that I was involved in, but I was associated with when Gary Snyder was making all that tricked out ice gear over in Minnesota.
That's the Jigawhopper.
Yeah, just bizarre stuff. I mean, just the detail. Nobody could put detail on that fine stuff like he could.
Again, I was too young to have been involved in that, or more than barely seeing it. But to me, when I think there was a time, and I don't even know what year that would be, probably 80s, maybe 90s, where people said, "Oh, this ice fishing industry is huge," because hey, when you live in North Dakota or Minnesota, you got more ice than you got open water. And that business, like Clam that I work with,
oh man,
there's some of these companies, and so then all of a sudden the innovation, it went from 0 to hero.
Oh yeah,
like you said, like Jigawhopper, I can remember seeing the walleye insider things, and they would release 10 lures.
Yeah,
and you're like, and they got spinners, they got hollow everything, craziness,
everything, and he's probably the most creative person I've ever been around, even to this day. He's still tinkering, making new stuff. I had a prime example this summer. He sent me some little, they call it a rocket spoon. It's something he made 15 years ago. I've got one in my, I'll show you later. But it's a little spoon, little narrow guy, punched out of marine brass. And in the middle, they punched it out and they put a wire and four little beads in there. He made them in a 16th, an eighth, and a quarter ounce. 15 years ago. So my wheels are growing. Me and Johnny Hines up there in Green Bay. So we took that small hook off and put a revolve hook on it. We were whacking walleyes all summer on it, off the boards and off bottom bouncers. Something that small. Because at the time on them rock piles or sandbars, them small perch were sliding in there and the walleyes were right behind it. I'm telling you.
You know, even small lures right now in Erie, the trend the last 3 or 4 years
It's crazy.
has been to downsize.
Yes, it has.
I mean, not to catch, I'm not even saying bigger or smaller fish, but to even just catch.
Yes. And that day, one day with John, I had 3 of them over 25 inches on that little tiny rocket spoon. It just, sometimes you have to try stuff. It might not make sense to you, but it makes sense to the fish. Years ago, Greg Pauly wrote a book. Do you listen when the walleyes speak?
Interesting.
Think about that. They're telling you what they want.
a lot of us do not pay attention to the clues, or we make them be something else.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I always say fishermen create they conjure up in their head these ideas on why something bites or doesn't bite, and it's usually not anywhere to do with what's really going on.
Yes, and that was early 80s. He wrote that. It was a pretty thick book, and it all made sense. And most of it was stuff that he put together fishing up in Fort Peck, the start of the Missouri River, and all the way down to Williston, Dickinson, all down to Missouri. Just when a walleye speak, do you listen?
And I think that's why, like nowadays, and again, I don't want to get into this controversy thing because today's about timing hairs. But forward-facing sonar and a lot of these, I would say younger guys, they're not all young that are doing it and having success with it. But when you can look at it, a fish, and be like, and you're chasing them down the lake, right? Like 8 individual fish. It takes a different skill set.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
But it also takes, I think that a lot of those guys, and this is not a blanket statement, but when you have a guy like Bob Probst, if you guys listen to this, think you're a walleye fisherman and you haven't looked at what Bob Probst did, shame on you.
Yeah.
Or Gary Roach and guys like that,
yes.
that really,
the gurus,
they understood, maybe they didn't, know barometric pressure and numbers, but they knew when this happens, you don't do this, or when this happens, we got to do this, and when that happens, we're going to do this.
Yes, exactly.
And I think now things are being simplified because you look at a fish and you see them swim away.
There it is.
And so some of that's being lost, which I think is a shame.
It is.
Maybe that's old guy shit talking.
It is. That's old school stuff with them guys, and they were naturals. You could put them boys anywhere and catch fish because they knew the program, they knew the system. They always had a game plan. If that game plan didn't work, they always had a backup. I remember when Bob Probst years ago when he fished with McClellan, they come to Winnebago. People would laugh at him. He had his little aluminum boat and his 5-gallon buckets all over. Nothing high tech. I'm telling you, you couldn't touch that guy. Him and Mike, they won the Mercury Nationals, I think, back-to-back years. Both them guys.
I remember Ron Linder I was a young kid, yelling at Bob Probst on Put-in-Bay when they used to have the tournaments off the island because all those guys had 16, 17-foot tillers. And Bob Probst showed up with a pontoon boat, a flower, like a sunflower plant, and he had a rocking chair as his driver's seat.
Yeah.
And I remember that I wasn't there, of course, but one of the guys that was an amateur, new friend of a friend, and they speared a wave and it washed everything right through that pontoon boat, right out the back.
It's amazing what never fished in Winnebago before. Man, I'm telling you. And like I said, his boat was just piled with odds and ends and jackets, but 5-gallon buckets. He had all kinds of them damn things. And them old locals, they laughed at him and Mike.
Yeah,
they didn't laugh long, man.
No.
And people like that, some of the so-called professional people, they learned a lot from Props. Because if you ask Bob Props something, he was nice enough to tell you and explain stuff to you. That's one thing. And not too many. And what he said, that was a gospel truth. He's just a natural.
Do you remember, he was almost like the anti-marketer, because he didn't really get into that whole game. But I remember when the Linder's power bait was the big thing, and there'd be all these funny commercials. And he went out there in one of them, and he was in his little video thing, and he dipped the jig in gasoline and then went and caught a fish on it. I was like, oh, shots fired.
He on Devil's Lake out there when they have a tournament, they have outdoor riders come in, and he'd take them out, and they wouldn't be out there very long. He was basically just a jigging a worm or jigging a crawler. Just that's it, basic stuff. He had to touch.
Who do you think's the best fisherman you ever fished with?
I've had some. I would put Larry Zimmerman as one of them out of Napoleon, North Dakota. Hardcore walleye fisherman. That's all he thinks about. Him and he used to fish with my real good friend, my late buddy Dave Garski. They were for many years. They were one of the teams to beat out there. And one of the interesting things when they used to fish and they learned what the windswept shorelines, they would hold the bait fish and yada yada. Well, Larry basically he would run the boat. He would actually maneuver the boat, and Dave would be on the bow casting. That's how they fish tournaments and won tournaments. Just boat control when that serious wind out there. And another one that goes back to old Jack Crawford, the old jig guy. I've seen him. I fished with him when I was a kid. Fiberglass rods, just like this. He could do this for 10 hours a day, the old man. Catch fish on Lake Geneva. In fact, they named a rock pile out there, a reef, Jack Crawford's reef out there. Die hard. Nothing fancy, nothing high tech. Back and just like this. And I'd talk about pros and this, and he just laughed. He didn't shake his head. He was a player, man. The old man was good.
I'll tell you flat out, a lot of the best fishermen that I personally know are people that have nothing to do with the game, if you want to call it that, or don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
Which I respect. I get it.
Yeah. I used to tell people out here when the casting was real big, I said, I'll tell you what, I'll take 6 old men that fish. All they ever did was fish the river and jig fish. And I said, I'll bring them out here. You cast, they're jigging. I said, I'll bet you they'll whip your ass. Does anybody want to take that bet? Nobody want to take it.
Come get you some.
Not back then. Graphite rods were kind of in the infant stage. It's them old boys and them old fiberglass rods.
Fiberglass and boron. And
yeah. But nowadays everything is high tech and it's good. You start out with the basic stuff, but they keep tweaking it out. Better materials, better production methods, yada yada. It's all good.
What do you think's next?
I don't know. With the forward imaging, I knew it was coming. We all knew that because when they kind of started tweaking, then they got into underwater cameras and that. Then they got into pinpointing fish with the underwater. You knew it was coming. It's technology. It's a new world out there. It's definitely turned the tournament world upside down. From the old boys that were the old grinders.
Can't do that no more.
You got that 20-year-old. He's a gamer, man. You'll put the hurts on you. They're very good at it, but that's technology. Other than that, I'll get back to the forward imaging. Years ago, the number one company was probably Lowrance. I don't even know if you hear about them anymore. And when they were really going good, I know a handful of boys that were way up there when the pro staff with Lowrance, they would get equipment that wasn't even on the market till 2 years later. That's how important it was to these guys, that they had that big edge on everybody else. And the same thing with motors from Mercury. I know them guys would go into the plant and they'd pick their motors. They would tune them the way they wanted them tuned for whatever kind of presentations they were doing, whether it be trolling back, even back then, back trolling, which is unheard of nowadays. That was a big thing for many years. They had the fiberglass plates and the splash plates in the back. And I've only seen one guy in all the years I fished out here back trolling on Lake Erie. One guy.
I know a guy that won a PWT doing it one day. Is it the same guy?
Yeah. It's unreal.
Oh, Mr. Walleye.
Yep. But all that stuff is gone, and people enjoy the motor trolling. And
I had him on the podcast and he was talking about that.
It's unreal.
the story is everybody was pulling lead core and thunder sticks, or at least the guys that were doing well. And then they had a cold front. All the fish went to the bottom. Nobody's catching jack. And he said, "Well, I know what we do in Minnesota when this happens." And
Yeah.
went and did it and
Yeah.
pulled it out. And those other guys took a crap.
Yeah. I was here back when the PWT, when it was held downtown in Port Clinton by the park over there. And back then I know he was trolling. He was working for Storm, and he was on one of the big pro staff. And like I said, I was fortunate to be there when he won that. And I know it's funny because even guys, I fished with a couple of the guys that won major tournaments, even back to RCL days. And they always talk about running night crawlers in cold water. And I always said, really? And I know he always had one rod, and quite a few, not quite a few, but a lot of fish came on that crawler, compared to a crankbait. And it's stuff like that in that cold water presentation. You wouldn't think of running night crawlers out here in that cold water in a big blade, but it works. But what they learned from that was a stepping stone, take it to the next step. Tweaking, you're always tweaking stuff out. And like I said, he was a hell of a stick back there on Winnebago. Him and they had a couple partners. And but like I said, you learn from these guys. Just listen to them. They were doing things that was unheard of. And even back then, the storm lures, I don't think they probably had some large ones, but they're probably the mediocre size, the smaller stuff. Like today, you guys downsizing on lures, and it's just part of the game. Figure out a program, a game plan, and go out there and do it. And if that don't succeed, try a backup plan. You gotta have a backup plan, whether it's successful or not.
We need a backup plan today.
Yeah. Today, I don't know. Today is one of them days.
Today we may finish with a non-recorded podcast, drinking some beers and eating some burgers.
Yeah, what it is. It's great being out here. I'm glad he took time. Both of us took the time to get together and do a nice little
I know
podcast.
It took us a while to get here. I'm so glad we did.
And maybe it took years.
Maybe we can do one more before we both go off into the walleye sunset. But
yeah, I love that. It's like I say, you're one of them grinders too. Yeah. You put together a program, you work hard at it, you got a good guide service, you're knowledgeable, and you do great podcasts. You've taken your podcast to the next level compared to anybody else out there. And even your YouTube channel, when you're fishing, you're not out there selling lures or promos or commercials. You're teaching people how to fish. You did that wild one with the wire line, but you're explaining how you keep lines straight. Just listen and look and listen.
You sell when you educate, right?
Yeah. Don't be too hard definitely. Yeah. But I mean, everything you do, whether you're running the boards and cranks or boards, and you did another great one. They're all great, but the one on the dipsies, that's another one. Nobody sits down and explains that. Get out and not just sit behind a desk and show something. You're out there, you're running it. A fish on, you keep this one straight so that one doesn't cross. You explain things, and hopefully people listen to it.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes
they don't.
You can lead a horse to water, Tommy. It's my job just to, those are going to listen. Those that aren't, and the guys that get better. Those that don't.
And you know what they say, like 10% of the fishermen catch 90% of the fish.
It hasn't changed.
They'll never change.
Well, the podcast has gone really well, and that's much in part to people like yourself that give us your time. And we've had some of what I call the old goats like yourself on. We've had Larry Dahlberg, Al Linder, Gary Roach, and we really want to document what you guys did, because I feel like a lot of people nowadays, they don't. You're doomed to repeat history if you don't know it. And
yeah,
some of the original stuff is cool to me.
When you hear it from the real person, you're not reading about it or whatever, watching it, whatever, YouTube, that's how it was back then. There's no exaggerating. There's no BS about it. It just, everybody enjoyed what they were doing, and especially in the fishing world, that you had to put, like you're 100% involved, 110%. If you're not, it's a hobby. Run it as a damn business. Be serious about it.
Yeah,
you're going to take a lot of heat, A lot of people are going to throw you under the bus because they're jealous.
Don't want to put in the time.
I'll tell you, there's one website I'm not going to mention. Every spring I would get thrown under the bus. They would go nuts. It got so bad that one time they had to pull it off. And I didn't even deal with that website. My name would come up, and all of a sudden, back then you didn't have to use your name on there. Stir the pot. Let's go after them. Man, oh man. One guy put on there, what do you think? Tommy's with the mafia or something? Is he a hitman? One guy goes, I don't know. He knows a lot of people.
Oh, fishing drama, man.
But I'll tell you the one I think we need to reach out to is Steve Worrell from Walleye First.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's another guy. I don't know if you ever did a podcast with him, but there's another guy. All them years, he was always at the shows, whether he was repping for boats, muskie fishing. There's a guy that did just about everything on his own dime.
Yeah.
And today his son took it over, and he's doing a great job on it. But that was another source of information from around the country, the guys that did participate in it, techniques and tournaments, especially tournaments, advertising. But yeah, Steve needs a good shout out. He's another class guy, old school boy, another old grinder. But every show I was at, he was always nice enough to come up and we'd do interviews and stuff. He always give me the time of day. Those are guys you respect.
No doubt. Well, I appreciate your time. And we are going to go check the weather and see in our time gabbing here that we might be able to get out of the water. Lake Erie is letting us know who's boss.
It's humming out there today.
When she says no, it's a no, but we're going to go check it. But I can't thank you enough, seriously, for your time and coming here half-assed to do this. So
it was a hoot.
Make sure you guys check into us on Spotify. We're on Amazon, Apple. If you can't find us where the podcast is at, you probably can't catch a walleye. I've said that, but I mean it. But go to bigwaterfishing.com if all else fails, or Bigwater Fishing on just about anything. Instagram, Facebook. We're even on TikTok now. So
damn.
Yeah. we're way too much posting going on. But if you want to see some little bit of, like Tommy said, a little bit of education, a little bit of entertainment, we try to have fun with it.
Check it out.
Check us out. Until the next episode, me and Tommy, we are either going fishing or we're having adult beverages and burgers. It's going to be one of those two.
All right. See ya.